What if I told you that the biggest risk in life isn't taking chances, it's playing it safe? Right now, there's a version of you that exists only in your imagination. A bolder version, a more successful version. A version living the life you dream about late at night, but dismiss every morning as unrealistic. The only thing separating you from that person is one thing: your relationship with risk. Most people spend their entire lives running from risk, convinced it will destroy them. But what if risk is actually the key to everything you've ever wanted? Today, we're diving into a book that reveals the unhidden art behind every great success story, The Art of Risk by Richard Harris. And by the end of this summary, you'll understand why the world's most successful people don't avoid risk, they master it. Hello, friends. Welcome to Book Breeze. Today we're going to talk about The Art of Risk by Richard Harris, a book that will completely transform how you think about taking chances, facing fear, and building the life you actually want. Meet Ryan. Ryan Mitchell sat in his small apartment in Portland, Oregon on a cold January evening, staring at the same four walls he'd been looking at for the past 3 years. He was 29 years old, working a corporate job that paid the bills but slowly drained his soul. Every day was the same. Wake up, commute to the office, sit in meetings that could have been emails, come home exhausted, watch Netflix, sleep, repeat. Weekends offered a brief escape, but by Sunday evening, the dread would creep back in. But this New Year's Eve was different. Ryan had made a resolution, like he did every year, but this time, he actually meant it. He looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and said out loud, "This year, I'm going to do something that actually matters. Something adventurous, something real." The problem was, he had no idea what that something was or how to find it. Ryan had always played it safe. Safe degree in business administration, safe corporate job, safe routine, safe life. And he was miserable. Deep down, he knew that his real passion was photography. He'd been taking photos since high school. Landscapes, street photography, candid portraits of strangers. His Instagram had a few hundred followers who genuinely loved his work. But whenever the thought of pursuing photography professionally crossed his mind, another voice would immediately shut it down. "That's not realistic. You'll go broke. What if you fail?" So he kept photography as a hobby and his soul-crushing job as his career. One Saturday afternoon, Ryan was browsing through a local bookstore, killing time before meeting his friend Marcus for lunch. He wandered into the self-help section, not because he was looking for anything specific, but because it was next to the photography books. His eyes landed on a title that made him stop. The Art of Risk: What We Can Learn from the World's Leading Risk Takers by Richard Harris. He picked it up and read the back cover. It talked about how the world's most successful people, entrepreneurs, athletes, artists, explorers, all had one thing in common. They understood how to take risks intelligently. They weren't reckless gamblers throwing caution to the wind. They were calculated risk takers who had learned to manage fear, prepare for failure, and turn uncertainty into opportunity. He flipped through the first few pages. One sentence jumped out at him. "The people who change the world aren't fearless. They're just better at managing fear than everyone else." That sentence hit him in his chest. He bought the book immediately. That evening, Ryan canceled his Netflix plans, made himself a strong cup of coffee, silenced his phone, and settled into his favorite reading chair. He opened to Chapter 1. Chapter 1. The title of the first chapter was Embrace Carefully Managed Risks. Ryan almost laughed. Great, he thought, another self-help book telling me to just take risks without explaining how. But he kept reading anyway, and within minutes, Harris's words grabbed him by the throat. Harris wrote that taking risks doesn't mean being stupid or reckless. True risk takers, the ones who actually succeed, don't just jump off cliffs hoping for the best. They analyze every angle. They calculate the worst-case scenario and plan how to avoid it. They prepare meticulously, then take the leap. The difference between a calculated risk and recklessness is preparation. Ryan thought about his college friend Marcus. Back in their sophomore year, Marcus had done something that everyone thought was insane. He dropped out of college to start a tech company. Ryan had thought Marcus was throwing his life away. But 5 years later, Marcus had sold that company for 7 figures and was living the kind of life Ryan could only dream about. At the time, Ryan had written it off as luck, but now, reading Harris's words, he realized Marcus hadn't been lucky, he'd been strategic. Marcus had spent a full year planning, building a prototype, finding investors, and creating safety nets before he made his move. It looked spontaneous from the outside, but it was actually carefully calculated. The book told the story of a mountaineer who spent years preparing to climb Everest. He trained his body for extreme altitude. He studied weather patterns. He learned from other climbers' failures. He mapped out emergency exit strategies for every possible scenario. When he finally attempted the climb, people called him brave. But he wasn't brave, he was prepared. And because he was prepared, he succeeded. Ryan closed the book and stared at the ceiling. He asked himself the question Harris had posed. What's the biggest risk you've been avoiding? The answer came immediately. Starting my own photography business. He'd been avoiding it for years. Every time the idea surfaced, he'd kill it with the same fears. What if I can't get clients? What if I go broke? What if I'm not good enough? What if people laugh at me? But Harris was saying something revolutionary. Instead of avoiding these fears, examine them, write them down, face them directly, then create a plan to address each one. Ryan grabbed his notebook and drew a line down the middle of the page. On the left side, he wrote worst-case scenarios. On the right side, he wrote how to prevent or survive it. Worst-case scenario number 1, no clients. Prevention or survival plan? Build portfolio by doing free shoots for friends and family. Reach out to local businesses. Start with part-time photography while keeping day job. Worst-case scenario number 2, financial struggle. Prevention or survival plan? Save 6 months of expenses before going full-time. Keep freelancing options open. Live minimally. Worst-case scenario number 3, public failure and embarrassment. Prevention or survival plan? Remember that most people are too busy with their own lives to care. Those who judge aren't paying my bills anyway. Worst-case scenario number 4, discovering I'm not talented enough. Prevention or survival plan? Take courses to improve skills. Study successful photographers. Practice daily. Talent is built, not born. As Ryan wrote these plans, something shifted inside him. The fears that had seemed overwhelming and vague suddenly became concrete problems with concrete solutions. They were still scary, but they were no longer paralyzing. The next morning, Ryan did something he'd been putting off for months. He bought a professional camera with his savings. His hands trembled as he entered his credit card information. This was real money. $2,000 he could have used for a dozen safer things. But Harris's words echoed in his mind. Confidence doesn't come before action. It comes from preparation and small, brave steps. Ryan started small. Every weekend he'd go to different neighborhoods in Portland with his camera. He photographed street scenes, local coffee shops, people walking their dogs in parks. He posted his favorite shots on Instagram with the hashtag #PortlandThroughMyLens. He was terrified every time he hit post. What if people hated them? What if nobody cared? But slowly, something unexpected happened. People started engaging with his photos. Not thousands of people, but a steady trickle of likes, comments, and shares. A local coffee shop owner reached out and asked if they could use one of his photos on their wall. They didn't pay him, but seeing his work framed and displayed gave him a rush he'd never felt at his corporate job. 3 weeks later, his phone rang. It was his friend Jake. "Hey man, our wedding photographer just bailed on us last minute, food poisoning or something. I know you've been doing photography. Any chance you could help us out? We'll pay you, obviously." Ryan's immediate instinct was to say no. A wedding was high pressure. What if I messed it up? What if the photos were terrible? This could ruin a friendship. But then he remembered Harris's first lesson: embrace carefully managed risks. He took a breath and asked Jake, "When's the wedding?" 2 weeks from Saturday. 2 weeks. Ryan could prepare. He spent the next 14 days researching wedding photography. He watched YouTube tutorials. He practiced in different lighting conditions. He created a shot list. He scouted the venue. He had backup batteries, backup memory cards, backup everything. By the wedding day, he was nervous but prepared. The wedding was a blur of activity, capturing the bride getting ready, the emotional ceremony, the chaotic reception. Ryan's hands shook during the first few shots, but then muscle memory and preparation took over. He moved through the day methodically, checking off his shot list, adjusting to challenges, staying calm. When he delivered the edited photos to Jake and his wife Sarah a week later, their reaction was something he'd never experienced in his corporate job. Sarah actually cried. "Ryan, these are incredible. You captured moments I didn't even remember happening. You have a real gift." Jake nodded enthusiastically. "Dude, you need to do this professionally. I'm serious. These are better than photos from photographers charging $5,000. That night, Ryan sat in his apartment looking at the $800 check Jake had given him. It wasn't about the money, though that was nice. It was about the feeling. For the first time in years, he felt like he'd done something that mattered, something that used his actual talents, something that made people happy. He opened The Art of Risk and reread the first chapter. Harris had written, "Taking a risk doesn't mean gambling with your life. It means facing your fears with a plan and the courage to execute it." Ryan realized that for his entire adult life, he'd been so afraid of taking risks that he'd been taking the biggest risk of all, wasting his life playing it safe. But now, for the first time, he was ready to change that. This was just the beginning. Ryan had no idea that his life was about to transform in ways he couldn't imagine.
2 months had passed since Jake's wedding, and Ryan's life had started to shift. He'd photographed 3 more weddings through word-of-mouth referrals, each one building his confidence and his portfolio. But he was still working his corporate job, and the contradiction was starting to wear on him. By day, he was Ryan, the marketing analyst. By night and on weekends, he was Ryan, the photographer. He was living 2 lives, and neither felt complete. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day at work, his boss had rejected his project proposal for the 3rd time. Ryan came home exhausted. He made himself dinner, sat down with The Art of Risk, and turned to Chapter 2, The Importance of Resilience. The chapter opened with a quote that hit him hard. "Everyone faces challenges. The difference between those who succeed and those who give up isn't the absence of obstacles, it's how they respond to them." Harris wrote that resilience isn't just about bouncing back from big failures. It's a daily practice. It's about getting knocked down repeatedly and choosing to stand up each time. It's about viewing setbacks not as signs that you should quit, but as data points showing you how to adjust and improve. Ryan thought about his own relationship with failure. He remembered his sophomore year of college when he'd tried out for the debate team. He'd prepared for weeks, but when he got up to speak in the tryout round, his mind went blank. He fumbled through his argument, sweating profusely, and could see the judges' disappointed faces. He didn't make the team. The embarrassment was so crushing that he never tried public speaking again. Not in classes, not at work, nowhere. One failure had convinced him he wasn't good at speaking, and he'd carried that limiting belief for nearly a decade. Harris wrote about an explorer who tried to cross the Sahara Desert. On his first attempt, he got lost, ran out of water, and had to be rescued.
He was humiliated. Many people would have quit there, telling themselves, "I'm not cut out for this." But this explorer spent the next year studying navigation, training in extreme heat conditions, and learning from his mistakes. On his second attempt, he successfully crossed the Sahara and went on to become one of the world's leading desert explorers. The lesson was clear. Failure is only permanent if you let it be. Resilience is treating every failure as temporary feedback, not a final verdict. Ryan wrote in his journal, "I am going to stop avoiding things I failed at once. I'm going to view every setback as a lesson, not a limit." The next day at work, there was a team meeting. Ryan's boss asked if anyone wanted to present the quarterly results to the leadership team. Normally, Ryan would sink into his chair and avoid eye contact. Public speaking, that was for other people who were naturally good at it. But this time, he thought about Harris's chapter on resilience. His heart pounded as he slowly raised his hand. "I can do it." Everyone looked at him with surprise. Even his boss seemed taken aback. "Really? Okay, Ryan, the presentation is on Friday. Make it good." Ryan spent the next 3 days preparing obsessively. He practiced his presentation at least 20 times. He recorded himself on video to identify nervous habits. He memorized the key points so he wouldn't be glued to the slides. He did breathing exercises to manage his anxiety. Friday came. Ryan stood in front of the leadership team, 8 senior managers who could be intimidating on a good day. His hands were sweaty, his heart raced. For a moment, he thought about faking an illness and running out, but he remembered, resilience is choosing to stand up when everything in you wants to run away. The first few minutes were rough. His voice wavered. He spoke too fast. But then something shifted. His preparation kicked in. His confidence grew with each slide. By the end, he was actually enjoying it. When he finished, the VP of Marketing nodded and said, "Nice work, Ryan. Clear and concise. Exactly what we needed." It wasn't a standing ovation, it wasn't life-changing, but it was proof that he could do something he'd convinced himself was impossible. Walking out of that conference room, Ryan felt like he'd conquered a mountain. But resilience isn't just about one-time victories. Harris emphasized in the book that resilience is like a muscle. You have to keep exercising it or it atrophies. Ryan took that to heart. He started giving himself small weekly challenges. Week 1, strike up a conversation with a stranger at a coffee shop. Week 2, submit 3 of his photos to a local art gallery exhibition. Week 3, ask his boss for feedback on his performance, something he'd always avoided. Week 4, reach out to a professional photographer he admired and ask for advice. Each challenge was uncomfortable. Each one pushed him slightly outside his comfort zone. But with each one, he felt his resilience growing stronger. Then came a real test. A local business magazine announced a photography contest, Best Portrait of Portland. First prize was $5,000 and a feature in the magazine. This was exactly the kind of opportunity Ryan had been waiting for. He spent weeks working on his submission, a powerful portrait of a homeless veteran he'd met downtown, with the city's skyline blurred behind him. The photo told a story of contrast, the veteran's weathered face in sharp focus representing those left behind, while the city's gleaming towers represented progress that didn't include everyone. Ryan was genuinely proud of this photo. It was some of his best work. He submitted it with cautious optimism. When the winners were announced 3 months later, his name wasn't on the list, not even honorable mention. He felt crushed. He'd put so much time and emotional energy into that submission. For a day, he wallowed. He questioned whether he was fooling himself. Maybe he wasn't actually talented. Maybe everyone had just been being nice. Maybe he should stick to his corporate job and stop pretending he could be a professional photographer. But then he remembered chapter 2. He opened the book and reread a passage. The moment you're most tempted to quit is usually right before a breakthrough. Resilience isn't about never feeling discouraged. It's about not letting discouragement make your decisions. Ryan decided to take action instead of quitting. He emailed the contest organizer and politely asked if the judges would be willing to provide feedback on his submission. He expected either no response or a generic thanks but no thanks. Instead, a judge replied with detailed feedback. Your technical skills are strong. Composition, lighting, and focus are all excellent. However, your submission lacked the emotional immediacy that winning photos had. The background was too distracting despite it being blurred. The subject's expression, while powerful, felt somewhat staged. Consider capturing more spontaneous, unguarded moments. This feedback was gold. Ryan spent the next month working specifically on those critiques. He practiced capturing candid moments instead of posed shots. He simplified his backgrounds. He worked on timing his shots to catch authentic expressions. 6 months later, another contest was announced. This time, Ryan submitted a photo he'd taken at a cancer survivor support group meeting, with permission, of course. The photo captured a woman laughing genuinely during a group session, with other members blurred in the background, their smiles visible. The emotion was raw and real. When the winners were announced, Ryan got second place. It wasn't first place, but it was proof. Proof that failure isn't permanent, proof that setbacks are setups for comebacks, proof that resilience works. Ryan's friend Marcus called him when he saw the announcement. "Dude, you placed! See, I told you you had talent." Ryan smiled. "It wasn't talent, man. It was resilience. I failed at the first contest, learned from it, and came back better." That night, Ryan wrote in his journal, "Resilience isn't about avoiding failure. It's about refusing to let failure define you. Every setback is just preparation for the setup." He was learning, growing, building the skills he needed not just for photography, but for life. But he still had more lessons to learn from the art of risk. He turned to chapter 3, ready for whatever came next.
Chapter 3. 6 months into his photography journey, Ryan had built momentum. He was booking weddings regularly. His Instagram following had grown to 3,000 engaged followers. He'd placed in a photography contest, but he was also exhausted. Working 40 hours a week at his corporate job, then spending every evening and weekend on photography was burning him out. Something had to give. One Friday night, after a particularly brutal week at work, Ryan collapsed on his couch and opened The Art of Risk to Chapter 3, Understanding the Line Between Courage and Recklessness. The chapter opened with a provocative question. How do you know when you're being brave versus when you're being stupid? Harris wrote that society often confuses the two. We call people reckless when they take big risks, and we call people cowardly when they play it safe. But the truth is more nuanced. The difference between courage and recklessness isn't about the size of the risk. It's about the quality of preparation and decision-making behind it. Harris shared the story of a stunt pilot who performed jaw-dropping aerial maneuvers that looked insanely reckless. Audiences would gasp, certain they were watching someone with a death wish. But in reality, this pilot calculated every angle, every wind speed, every mechanical variable. He had backup plans for his backup plans. He practiced each stunt hundreds of times.
What looked reckless to outsiders was actually the result of meticulous preparation and calculated risk assessment. Ryan thought about his friend Marcus, who seemed to take huge risks all the time, dropping out of college, starting companies, investing in cryptocurrency before it was popular. Ryan had always secretly thought Marcus was a little crazy, maybe even immature. But now he wondered, was Marcus reckless, or was Ryan just too scared to see the strategy behind Marcus's moves? The book asked readers to do an exercise. Ryan grabbed his journal and drew 2 columns. Column 1, things I avoid because I'm scared. Column 2, things I do impulsively without thinking. In the first column, he wrote, quitting my job to pursue photography full-time, raising my photography prices, scared of losing clients, pitching my work to high-end clients, moving to a bigger city with more opportunities. In the second column, he wrote, buying camera equipment when I feel insecure about my skills, saying yes to every photography gig, even ones that don't align with my brand, scrolling social media comparing myself to others, making financial decisions based on emotion rather than strategy. Looking at these 2 columns, Ryan realized something uncomfortable. He was neither courageous nor particularly careful. He avoided big, important risks while taking small, meaningless ones. He was scared of the things that could actually change his life, but reckless with his time, money, and energy on things that didn't matter. Harris wrote that true courage isn't about being fearless, it's about facing your actual fears with preparation and strategy. Recklessness is either avoiding all risk, which guarantees stagnation, or taking risks impulsively without proper planning, which guarantees disaster. The next week, an opportunity arose that would test Ryan's ability to distinguish courage from recklessness. A high-end wedding venue reached out to him. They'd seen his work online and wanted to feature him as one of their preferred photographers. This could be huge. The venue hosted luxury weddings with budgets of $50,000 and up. But there was a catch. They required their photographers to be fully insured, have professional-grade backup equipment, and be available year-round, meaning no other job could conflict with potential bookings. In other words, to seize this opportunity, Ryan would have to quit his corporate job and go all in on photography. His immediate reaction was panic. This felt reckless, impulsive. What if it didn't work out? He'd be throwing away a stable salary, health insurance, a 401k. His logical brain screamed, this is too risky. But then he stopped and applied Harris's framework. Is this reckless, or am I just scared? He spent an entire weekend doing what Harris would call a courage audit. He grabbed his journal and wrote out every aspect of this decision. Financial analysis. Current job salary, $65,000 a year. Current photography income, part-time, $28,000 a year. Projected photography income, full-time, $75,000 to $90,000 a year based on current booking rate. Savings, $18,000, about 6 months of expenses. Risk assessment. Worst case, no clients, burn through savings, have to get another corporate job. Best case, become established photographer, build thriving business, and actually enjoy work. Most likely case, struggle for first year, grow steadily, reach stability by year 2. Preparation level. Portfolio, strong and growing. Client testimonials, excellent. Insurance, can get it. Equipment, have primary gear, need to invest in backups. Business plan, need to create one. Marketing strategy, need to formalize one. Emergency fund, yes, in place. Ryan realized that the venue opportunity was actually the perfect forcing function. Without it, he might keep his corporate job for years, always planning to quit someday but never pulling the trigger. But this opportunity had a deadline. He had to decide within 2 weeks. He called Marcus. I need your honest opinion. I've got this chance to go full-time for photography, but it means quitting my job. Am I being brave or stupid?" Marcus laughed. "Dude, those aren't opposites. You can be both. The question is, are you prepared?" "I think so. I've got savings, clients, a plan." "Then what are you really afraid of?" Ryan paused. "Honestly, I'm afraid of failing publicly. If I quit my job and then fail, everyone will think I was an idiot for leaving a stable career. And what if you don't quit and wake up in 20 years having never tried? Which failure would haunt you more?" That question hit Ryan like a freight train. He'd been so focused on the fear of trying and failing that he'd ignored the certainty of not trying and regretting. Now, if you're sitting there watching this story unfold and thinking, "I've got a dream I've been too scared to pursue," let me tell you something. This channel exists for you. Hit that subscribe button right now, because every single week I'm breaking down books that show you exactly how people went from stuck and scared to living the life they actually wanted. Ryan's story isn't special because he had some unique gift. It's special because he learned to manage fear instead of being paralyzed by it. Turn on notifications, because the next chapters of Ryan's journey and the next books we cover could be the catalyst you need. Don't let another year pass wondering, what if? Ryan spent the next week not just feeling scared, but actively preparing. He used Harris's framework from the book. Step 1. Identify the real risks. Step 2. Create mitigation strategies for each risk. Step 3. Set clear success metrics. Step 4. Build in accountability. Step 5. Set a decision deadline. For each risk, financial instability, loss of health insurance, social embarrassment, he created concrete mitigation strategies. He researched health insurance for self-employed people. He created a detailed business budget. He talked to other full-time photographers about their experiences. He built a 12-month business plan with quarterly milestones. By the end of the week, he didn't feel fearless. He felt prepared. And that was enough. On Monday morning, Ryan walked into his boss's office and gave his 2 weeks' notice. His hands shook as he handed over the resignation letter, but his voice was steady. His boss was shocked. "Ryan, are you sure? This seems impulsive." Ryan smiled. "It's not impulsive. I've been preparing for this for months. It's calculated, and I'm ready." Walking out of that office, Ryan felt something he'd never felt before. The exhilaration that comes from choosing courage over comfort. He'd crossed the line from thinking about his dreams to actively pursuing them. That night, he opened The Art of Risk and wrote in the margin of Chapter 3, "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's taking action despite fear, armed with preparation and purpose." Ryan's journey was far from over. In fact, the hardest parts were still ahead. But he'd learned to distinguish between reckless gambling and calculated risk-taking, and that knowledge would carry him through everything that came next. Chapter 4. 3 months after quitting his corporate job, Ryan sat in his small apartment at 2 a.m., staring at his bank account. He'd burned through half his savings. It was November. Wedding season was over, and bookings had dried up. The high-end venue that had inspired him to quit had only sent him 2 clients so far, both of whom were difficult to work with and left mediocre reviews. His carefully calculated projections were proving overly optimistic. He felt sick to his stomach. Had he made a catastrophic mistake? Was Marcus right to take risks, but Ryan wrong to follow his example? Maybe he wasn't cut out for entrepreneurship. Maybe he should have stayed in his safe corporate job. Unable to sleep, Ryan opened The Art of Risk to Chapter 4, Learning from Failure. At first, he almost laughed bitterly. "Great timing," he muttered. But he started reading, and Harris's words felt like they'd been written specifically for this moment. The chapter opened with a line that stopped Ryan cold. "Failure is not the opposite of success. Failure is the tuition you pay for success. Harris wrote that every successful person he'd studied had failed multiple times, often spectacularly. The difference between those who eventually succeeded and those who gave up wasn't that the successful ones failed less, it was that they treated failure differently. They viewed failure as data, not as a verdict. The chapter told the story of a tech entrepreneur who launched 5 failed startups before creating a billion-dollar company. Each failure taught him something critical. The first failed because he built a product nobody wanted. The second failed because he hired the wrong team. The third failed because his timing was wrong. The fourth failed because he ran out of capital too quickly. Each failure was painful. Each one cost him money and credibility. But each one also gave him knowledge that made the eventual success possible. Harris emphasized that the key is creating a failure autopsy, examining each failure clinically to extract the lessons without drowning in shame or self-pity. Ryan grabbed his journal and decided to do exactly that. He titled the page, "Why My Photography Business is Struggling," and forced himself to be brutally honest. Problem number 1, overdependence on weddings. Wedding season is June to September. I assumed bookings would continue year-round. I didn't diversify income streams. Lesson: need multiple revenue streams: corporate headshot photography, portraits, stock photography, and workshops. Problem number 2, pricing myself too low. I charged $800 for Jake's wedding because I was insecure. I kept prices low to compete, but attracted price-sensitive clients. Low prices attract difficult clients who don't value your work. Lesson: raise prices to reflect value and attract better clients. Problem number 3, poor marketing strategy. I relied entirely on word of mouth and Instagram. I didn't build an email list or website portfolio. I didn't reach out to businesses or create a sales strategy. Lesson: marketing is not optional, it's essential. Problem number 4, no financial cushion. 6 months of savings seemed like enough. I didn't account for irregular cash flow. I should have had 12 months saved. Lesson: conservative financial planning for irregular income. Problem number 5, imposter syndrome. I said yes to every gig, even ones outside my skill set. I was afraid to specialize or say no. This diluted my brand and led to mediocre results. Lesson: focus on what I'm actually good at. It's okay to niche down. Writing this out was painful but clarifying. Ryan wasn't failing because he lacked talent or because he'd made a terrible decision to pursue photography. He was struggling because he'd made specific, fixable mistakes. That meant he could learn from them and adjust. Harris wrote in the book, "The fastest way to success is to double your failure rate, but only if you're learning from each failure." Ryan decided he needed to treat his business like an experiment. He created what he called his failure log, a document where he'd record every mistake, what he learned from it, and how he'd avoid it in the future. The next day, Ryan took action on his lessons. Action number 1. He researched year-round photography income streams. He discovered that corporate headshot photography was lucrative and needed year-round. He reached out to 10 local businesses offering professional headshot sessions for their websites and LinkedIn profiles. 3 responded with interest. Action number 2. He raised his wedding photography prices from $1,200 to $2,500. This was terrifying. What if nobody booked him? But he remembered Harris's lesson: attract the right clients, not the most clients. Action number 3. He built a proper website using Squarespace, showcasing his best work organized by category: weddings, corporate, portraits. He started an email newsletter offering photography tips to build an audience. Action number 4. he took a part-time remote job doing social media management for a small marketing agency. It wasn't glamorous, but it provided $2,000 a month in steady income while he built his photography business. Action number 5. He decided to specialize. After reviewing his portfolio, he realized his best work was portrait photography, capturing authentic human emotion. He rebranded himself as a portrait and lifestyle photographer and stopped taking landscape or product photography gigs that didn't excite him. The results weren't immediate. December was still slow, but in January, something shifted. One of the businesses he'd reached out to booked him for corporate headshots for their entire 50-person team at $100 per person, a $5,000 contract. His new website started attracting inquiries from better clients who were willing to pay his higher rates. His email newsletter grew to 200 subscribers who actually engaged with his content. More importantly, Ryan's relationship with failure had transformed. When a potential client chose another photographer, he didn't spiral into self-doubt. He simply asked for feedback, learned from it, and moved on. When a photo shoot didn't go as planned, he didn't beat himself up. He analyzed what went wrong and adjusted for next time. Harris wrote in the chapter, "Resilient people don't experience less failure, they just have a shorter recovery time." Ryan experienced this firsthand. One day he pitched his photography services to a high-end real estate agency. He spent hours on the proposal, customizing a package for their needs. They responded with a curt email, "Thanks, but we've decided to go with another photographer who has more experience in real estate." The old Ryan would have been devastated, convinced this proved he wasn't good enough. The new Ryan read the email, felt disappointed for about 10 minutes, then immediately emailed back, "I understand. Would you mind sharing what made you choose the other photographer? I'm always looking to improve my services." The agency actually responded, "Your portfolio is strong, but you didn't have examples of real estate photography specifically. For future reference, if you want to work with real estate clients, you should have property photos in your portfolio." Ryan thanked them for the feedback and spent the next weekend photographing friends' apartments and houses for free, building a real estate portfolio. A month later, he pitched another real estate agency, this time with relevant samples, and booked the contract. This was the power of treating failure as data. Every no was just information showing him how to get to yes. By March, Ryan's business had stabilized. He wasn't wealthy, but he was profitable. More importantly, he was learning and growing faster than he ever had in his corporate job. Each failure was a lesson. Each lesson made him stronger. One evening, Marcus called him. "Dude, I saw your work for that tech startup on LinkedIn. Those headshots are incredible. You're really figuring this out." I smiled. "You know what's funny? I'm failing more now than I ever did at my corporate job, but I'm also succeeding more. Turns out they go hand in hand. That's the whole game, man. Most people never succeed because they're too afraid to fail. You're succeeding because you're willing to fail fast and learn faster." That night, Ryan wrote in his failure log, "Today I am grateful for every mistake I have made. Each one was a teacher I didn't know I needed. The goal isn't to avoid failure, it's to make failure work for you." Ryan closed chapter 4 and felt a shift in his identity. He was no longer someone who feared failure. He was someone who used failure as fuel, and that made all the difference.
Chapter 5. By the summer of his second year as a full-time photographer, Ryan had found his rhythm. His business was profitable, his portfolio was strong, and his confidence had grown immensely. But something was missing. Despite his success, he often felt isolated. Running a solo photography business meant spending most of his time alone, editing photos in his apartment, communicating with clients via email, shooting solo at events.
One Saturday evening, after finishing an exhausting wedding shoot, Ryan sat in his apartment feeling oddly empty despite the successful day. He opened The Art of Risk to Chapter 5, The Value of Community and Shared Experiences. The chapter opened with a line that hit him immediately. No one succeeds alone. Behind every great achievement is a community that supported, challenged, and inspired that person to become their best self. Harris wrote that Western culture glorifies the self-made individual, the lone wolf who succeeds through sheer willpower. But this is a myth. When researchers studied successful entrepreneurs, athletes, artists, and leaders, they found that every single one had a strong community backing them. Some had mentors, some had peer groups, some had accountability partners, but none succeeded in isolation. Ryan realized he'd been operating exactly like that mythical lone wolf. He worked alone, problem-solved alone, celebrated wins alone, and processed failures alone. He had Marcus, but their friendship had become less frequent as both got busy with their lives. He had clients, but those were transactional relationships. He didn't have a real community of people who understood what he was trying to build. Harris told the story of two mountain climbers who attempted to summit K2, one of the world's most dangerous mountains. One climber went solo, relying entirely on his own strength and judgment. The other climbed with a team, where members supported each other, shared resources, and made decisions collectively. The solo climber died on the mountain. The team summited successfully, and all returned safely. The difference wasn't skill or courage, it was community. The chapter outlined 3 types of communities every risk-taker needs. A learning community, people who are on a similar journey and can share knowledge, resources, and experiences. A support community, people who believe in you, encourage you during difficult times, and celebrate your wins. And accountability community, people who challenge you, push you beyond your comfort zone, and hold you to your commitments. Ryan realized he had none of these. He decided to change that immediately. The next week, Ryan searched for photography groups in Portland. He found a meetup group called Portland Professional Photographers that met monthly. He'd seen it before, but always made excuses not to go. He was too busy, he was too new to the industry, he wouldn't fit in. But this time, he showed up. Walking into that first meetup was nerve-wracking. The room was full of photographers who seemed more experienced, more confident, more established. Ryan's imposter syndrome kicked in hard, but he remembered Harris's words, "Community isn't about being the best person in the room. It's about being in a room where everyone makes each other better." He introduced himself to a photographer named Jessica, who specialized in food photography for restaurants. "I'm Ryan. I mostly do portraits and weddings. I'm still pretty new to running a business full-time." Jessica smiled warmly. "We all started somewhere. How long have you been at it?" "About 18 months full-time." "That's the hardest phase, when you're past beginner but not yet established. You feel like you should have it figured out, but you're still learning everything. I remember that stage. It gets easier, I promise." Just hearing someone acknowledge the difficulty of his current phase made him feel less alone. They talked about common challenges, difficult clients, pricing strategies, slow season, imposter syndrome. Ryan discovered that even photographers who seemed wildly successful struggled with the same doubts he did. Over the next few months, Ryan became a regular at the meetup. He started building genuine friendships with other photographers. They shared leads when they had conflicting bookings. They gave each other honest feedback on portfolio work. They vented about difficult clients and celebrated each other's wins. One photographer, Carlos, specialized in commercial photography for tech companies. He gave Ryan advice that transformed his business. "Stop marketing yourself as a generalist who does everything. Pick one thing you're exceptional at and own it completely. Specialists charge more and attract better clients than generalists." Ryan took this advice to heart. He rebranded himself specifically as a portrait photographer specializing in capturing authentic emotion for professionals and families. His messaging became clearer, his marketing more focused, and his bookings more consistent. But the real transformation came when the group organized a collaborative project. 8 photographers, each with different specialties, decided to create a photo exhibition called Portland Faces that would showcase the diversity of the city. Each photographer would contribute 10 portraits of people from different walks of life, and they'd display the work in a local gallery. Ryan had never done anything like this. Working collaboratively on creative work felt risky. What if my photos weren't good enough compared to everyone else's? But he remembered Harris's lesson about community. This wasn't about competition. It was about shared experience making everyone better. The project took 3 months. Ryan photographed people he never would have approached on his own: a retired jazz musician, a refugee family, a drag queen performer, a firefighter, a homeless youth advocate. Working on this project stretched his skills and his empathy, and throughout the process, the other photographers offered feedback, encouragement, and inspiration. When the exhibition opened, over 300 people attended. Local press covered it. Several photographers, including Ryan, received inquiries from new clients who saw the exhibition. But more valuable than any business outcome was the experience itself. The collaboration, the shared creative vision, the feeling of being part of something bigger than himself. Ryan also realized he needed a support community beyond just professional photographers. He started being more intentional about his personal relationships. He scheduled regular dinners with Marcus, where they'd talk honestly about their fears, failures, and dreams. He reconnected with his brother, who lived in Seattle, and started visiting him monthly. He even joined a weekly hiking group, not because he was passionate about hiking, but because he needed to connect with people outside his industry and profession. On those hikes, he met a teacher, a nurse, an accountant, and a software developer. None of them understood the specifics of running a photography business, but they understood the universal challenges of pursuing meaningful work, managing stress, and building a life. One day on a hike, the nurse, Sandra, asked Ryan, "Do you ever feel like you're failing at everything?" Ryan laughed. "Constantly." "Why?" "I don't know. I see your Instagram and your work, and it looks like you have it all figured out. Meanwhile, I feel like I'm barely keeping my head above water." Ryan thought about how to respond. "Can I be honest? I fail at something almost every day. I lose clients, I take bad photos, I make business mistakes. But I've learned that failure isn't the problem, isolation is. When I try to handle everything alone, it crushes me. When I share it with people who get it, it becomes manageable." Sandra nodded thoughtfully. "I needed to hear that." That conversation made Ryan realize that community isn't just about receiving support, it's about offering it too. By being vulnerable about his struggles, he gave others permission to be vulnerable about theirs. That mutual vulnerability created real connection. Harris wrote in the chapter, "Shared experiences don't just create memories, they create resilience, perspective, and belonging. When you face challenges alongside others, those challenges become less heavy." Ryan experienced this profoundly during his second winter as a full-time photographer. December and January were brutal. Bookings dropped, money was tight, and seasonal depression kicked in hard. He felt like giving up. But this time, he didn't suffer alone. He texted the photography group chat. "Anyone else feeling the winter slump? I'm struggling." Within minutes, responses flooded in. "Jessica, every single year, January is the worst, but it always picks up in February. Hang in there." "Carlos, I feel you. I just lost a big client contract, but I'm using this slow time to update my portfolio and plan for spring." Another photographer, Mira, "Same. Let's do a coffee meetup this week. Sometimes you just need to remember you're not alone." That simple exchange, knowing others were experiencing the same struggle, made the burden lighter. They met for coffee, vented together, shared strategies for getting through slow season, and reminded each other why they chose this path in the first place. By February, bookings picked up again, but more importantly, Ryan had learned that he didn't have to face challenges alone. He had a community, and that made every risk more manageable. One evening, as Ryan was editing photos while video chatting with Marcus, he said, "You know what's funny, Marcus? When I quit my corporate job, I thought I was becoming independent, but actually I've become more dependent on community, on relationships, on collaboration, and that's made me stronger, not weaker."
Marcus grinned. That's the paradox of success, man. We think we need to be self-sufficient, but actually we need to be well-connected. Nobody makes it alone. Ryan closed Chapter 5 feeling profoundly grateful. He'd built a career he loved, but more importantly, he'd built a community that made that career sustainable. He wasn't just a photographer anymore. He was part of a network of creatives, entrepreneurs, and risk takers who lifted each other up. And that made all the difference. But Ryan's journey wasn't over. The lessons he learned were about to be tested in ways he couldn't yet imagine. 2 years later, it was a crisp autumn morning in Portland, exactly 2 years after Ryan had first picked up The Art of Risk in that bookstore. He sat in his new photography studio, a real space with natural light, professional equipment, and a waiting area for clients. He'd signed the lease 3 months ago, another calculated risk that had paid off. His phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a potential client. "Hi Ryan, I'm getting married next spring and saw your work at the Portland Faces exhibition last year. Your portraits are exactly what we're looking for. Authentic emotion, not staged perfection. Do you have availability for June 15th? Ryan smiled. This was his third booking this week, and it was only Tuesday. His rates were now $3,500 per wedding, and he was selective about which projects he took. He'd learned that saying no to the wrong opportunities was just as important as saying yes to the right ones. But more than the financial success or the growing reputation, what struck Ryan was how different he felt. 2 years ago, he'd been paralyzed by fear, trapped in a life that felt safe but empty. Now he regularly took risks, big and small, and most importantly, he'd learned how to take them intelligently. He opened his journal and reflected on the 5 lessons from The Art of Risk that had transformed his life. Lesson 1. Embrace carefully managed risks. He'd learned that risk isn't about recklessness. It's about facing fears with preparation. Every major decision he made now started with the question, what's the worst that could happen, and how can I prepare for it? Lesson 2. The importance of resilience. He'd learned that failure isn't final, it's feedback. His failure log had become one of his most valuable business tools, turning every setback into a lesson. Lesson 3. Understanding courage versus recklessness. He'd learned that courage means taking action despite fear, but with strategy. He no longer confused hesitation with wisdom or impulsiveness with bravery. Lesson 4. Learning from failure. He'd learned that the fastest path to success is through failure, as long as you're learning from each one. His business had dozens of failures behind it, and each one made him better. Lesson 5. The value of community. He'd learned that no one succeeds alone. His photography community, his accountability partners, his support network. These relationships made success possible and sustainable. Ryan's phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey man, I'm in Portland for a few days. Want to grab dinner tonight?" "Definitely. Actually, I want to run something by you." That evening at dinner, Ryan shared his idea with Marcus. "I've been thinking, The Art of Risk changed my life. All these lessons I learned about taking calculated risks, building resilience, learning from failure, I want to share them. I'm thinking about starting a workshop for aspiring photographers who want to turn their passion into a business. Not just teaching photography skills, but teaching the mindset and business strategy behind building a creative career." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Dude, that's perfect.
You've literally done exactly what they want to do. You've made every mistake and learned from it. When do you start? That's the thing. I'm scared. What if nobody signs up? What if I'm not good enough to teach? What if... Marcus cut him off with a laugh. Ryan, listen to yourself. You're still scared. But that's not the question anymore. The question is, are you prepared? Do you have a plan? Have you calculated the risk? Ryan paused and smiled. Marcus was right. Fear was still there. It probably always would be. But fear was no longer in control. He'd learned to work with fear, to use it as information, rather than letting it make his decisions. You know what? You're right. I'll start small. I'll run a pilot workshop for just 10 people. If it goes well, I'll scale it. If it fails, I'll learn from it and adjust. That's the spirit. Calculated risk, baby. Later that night, Ryan sat in his studio looking at a photo he'd framed on his wall. The portrait from the Portland Faces exhibition that had won second place in that contest, the one he'd submitted after learning from his first failure. Below it, he had written a quote from The Art of Risk. "The biggest risk is not taking any risks. In a world that's changing rapidly, the only strategy guaranteed to fail is not taking risks." Ryan opened his laptop and started drafting the curriculum for his workshop. He was scared, but he was also excited, and he was prepared. The Art of Risk hadn't just changed his career, it had changed who he was. He was no longer the guy playing it safe, avoiding challenges and living a life of quiet desperation. He was someone who took intelligent risks, learned from failures, built resilience, and created opportunities. 2 years ago, he'd been stuck in a life that felt like it was happening to him. Now he was actively creating the life he wanted. The transformation wasn't dramatic or overnight. It was the result of hundreds of small, brave decisions compounded over time. And the best part? His journey was far from over. He knew there would be more failures, more challenges, more risks ahead. But now he had the tools to handle them. More importantly, he had the mindset that turned obstacles into opportunities and fear into fuel. Ryan closed his laptop and walked to the window of his studio. Portland's skyline glowed in the evening light. He thought about that version of himself 2 years ago, scared, stuck, uncertain. If he could send that guy a message, what would he say? Maybe this: taking risks isn't about being fearless. It's about being so committed to the life you want that you're willing to be scared and do it anyway. And when you approach risk with strategy, community, and resilience, you don't just survive, you thrive. Ryan smiled and turned back to his work. He had a workshop to build, clients to serve, and a life to create, one calculated risk at a time.
So here's what I want you to take away from Ryan's story and from The Art of Risk. You don't have to stay stuck. That dream you've been avoiding because it feels too risky, it's probably the exact thing you should be pursuing if you approach it the right way. Which of these 5 lessons hit you the hardest? Was it learning to embrace carefully managed risks? Understanding the power of resilience? Knowing the difference between courage and recklessness? Discovering how to learn from failure, or realizing you need community to succeed? Drop a comment below and tell me, what's the one risk you've been avoiding that you know deep down you need to take? And more importantly, what's actually stopping you? Is it fear, lack of preparation, or maybe just not having a clear plan? If Ryan's transformation from stuck corporate employee to thriving photographer inspired you, if you saw yourself in his fears, his failures, and his eventual success, do 3 things for me right now. First, smash that like button. It helps this video reach other people who are exactly where you are right now, scared to take the leap they know they need to take. Second, share this video with someone you know who's been playing it too safe. Maybe it's a friend who keeps talking about starting a business but never does. Maybe it's a family member stuck in a job they hate. Maybe it's someone who has a dream but keeps finding excuses. Send them this. They'll thank you. Third, subscribe to Book Breeze and turn on notifications, because every single week I'm breaking down books that don't just give you information, they give you transformation. Books that show you exactly how real people went from stuck to successful. Books that give you the roadmap, the mindset, and the strategies to build the life you actually want. Here's the truth that Richard Harris teaches in The Art of Risk. The biggest risk isn't failing at something you tried. The biggest risk is succeeding at something that doesn't matter. It's spending your one life playing it safe and waking up 20 years from now full of regrets about the chances you didn't take. You don't need to be fearless. You just need to be strategic. You don't need to take huge, reckless leaps. You just need to take small, calculated steps in the right direction. And you don't need to do it alone. Build a community that supports you. Ryan's story proves that transformation is possible. 2 years ago, he was paralyzed by fear. Today, he's thriving. The only difference? He stopped waiting for the perfect moment and started taking action. Imperfect, scared, but strategic action. What about you? What would your life look like 2 years from now if you started taking calculated risks today? What if you stopped letting fear make your decisions? What if you started treating failure as feedback instead of a verdict? You already know what risk you need to take. Stop pretending you don't. The question isn't, should I do this? The question is, how do I prepare to do this well? This is Book Breeze, bringing you the books that change lives, told through stories that stick. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, calculate your risks, build your resilience, and create the life you're meant to live. The world is waiting for the person you're too scared to become. Don't make it wait any longer.